So I didn't grow up playing games. And so, but as an educator and a teacher, you know, paying attention to, I think, technology and what's going on in society, there's a lot of gaps in the way we teach and the effectiveness of it. Why would you want to practice some things virtually? Well, because when you have to handle this baby in real life, there's a certain way to do it that's going to make a difference for how well they're going to do, and you want to be able to practice that. It's good that you're a little stressed, because when you go to a real delivery and you need to help a baby breathe, even though I've done this a long time, you still get your own heart rate goes up because you need to help this baby, and if you don't do it, that can lead to a worse outcome for them, or in some situations, like if you don't get the intubation, they could die. So there's a lot on the line. And so being able to practice that and get comfortable with the sequence, that could translate into like at least a comfort level with that component of it.
The conclusion we came to was that VR is really an appropriate vehicle to teach medical education and simulation. They immersed themselves in the video and participated instead of just watching. They started picking up tools themselves. And then when we translated them back into the real world and said, all right, do it again, show us what you can do, they had great recall that was comparable to our advanced fellows who had been doing this over and over again in their jobs for the past 2 and 3 years.
We're looking at replacing one of our top end simulators right now, and it's over $200,000. It's 10 years old. So,
Wow.
So I think, over time, that hopefully the return on investment as we show the outcomes will be significant.
If you have a mannequin-based sim lab, the cost of that sim lab is through the roof. Whereas Acadicus, you can change in 20 seconds to all these settings and scenes for your students. The variety, what we can do, how we can enhance the students, how we can progress patients is just so much simpler in this environment.
So a headset's about $400 now, and the gaming laptop, maybe $3,500. And when you compare that to the cost of a simulator, over time, it's much less expensive to have the virtual reality.
In traditional training where we do like a plastic mannequin and we do a neonatal resuscitation program, if I try and think about the courses I've taken, I have a hard time remembering any of those courses, like the people, the surrounding. But if I think of like a ride that I did at Disney World, like I can remember parts of it, or I can remember a movie. I can absolutely remember like real live resuscitations I was at. And so when I did VR, I would remember it, and it affected me in a very different way. And it was this recognition of like, this approach might allow the learning you're doing in that environment to be more memorable. And then in a real life situation, things come back to you, or they become more natural, versus I think some of the traditional training doesn't always do that. And so I'm not saying this is a one size fits all, but it is a unique way to try and address some of the current educational gaps. I think one of the challenges with current sim is it's very evident you have a plastic baby in front of you, and and sometimes people, I think, get stuck on what's not real. The mind is like very aware of that and doesn't allow them then to kind of like move on and really absorb the learning experience. And so what we wanted to do with VR was have that environment, when you look around, look very real.
And so all that experience, we're pulling into the simulation, because we can create any type of scenario in VR, even more so than traditional simulation, because we can create any kind of environment, any kind of patient, any kind of situation, and then just make it real for the students. And hey, let's talk through this. How should we approach this?
Through the Acadicus Commons, download the software for free, log on to the Acadicus Commons for free. The Acadicus Commons is kind of like our IKEA, where all of the assets that people have been working on that are in our shared public library, our content library, is on display for you to look at and experience for free.
We also ask faculty the same thing, tell us what you would like to see, what you'd like to be able to do in VR. And one of the very top priorities was they wanted the ability to customize these scenarios and update them on their own. If there was an update in practice, or faculty wanted to tweak it a little bit and make it their own, you needed programmer support, and that just was difficult. So one nice thing about the Acadicus scenarios is once we have the scene, like this is a scene in a long-term care facility, with an elderly patient. We can change the scenes, we can change the patients, we can pick from multiple environments, we can have a diverse set of patients, and really select those type of things that either you want students to practice before they get in the clinical environment, or things that you know they're not going to get a chance to really practice, that you want to give them that opportunity. You can change any of this on the fly as you go. So maybe you want the blood pressure to start out in normal range, and then as things progress, it starts to drop, or, you know, whatever you do in
Yeah.
simulation, we can do in VR.
I couldn't create an operating room in my sim lab and make them feel like they're in an operating room and understand where some of the things are and where people might be and all that. Well, that's something I can do in VR.
For a learner, just kind of walking through that, the focus isn't so much on like, oh, I want to make sure the baby's everything feels right in my hands. It's more so like, do you know the process? Why are you doing that? And with each step, there can be some auditory, visual cues, but there can be, like, as an instructor, opportunity for feedback or dialogue.
You can leverage these VR environments to create content that can be deployed in multiple ways.
Could we make a medical simulation, a medical video game where you really felt like you were in the game? You were the doctor performing the procedure in real time. There were high stakes. There was pressure if you didn't get it right. And, you know, what I found with putting that headset on and being in an immersive environment like Acadicus is it really ratchets up that reality factor. Each student having their own VR sim, how great would it be for them early on to put a headset on and say, I've never met a patient, but I'm going to do the pediatric airway readiness scenario today, or I'm going to do an adult status epilepticus seizure scenario today, because someday I'm going to deal with that. And they can do it as many times as they want. They can mess it up as much as they want because they're a first-year medical student. They don't know that much clinical medicine, but they're going to learn some through being in a VR headset and practicing it in an environment that seems so real that it's hard for them to tell the difference.
So there's lots of ways to challenge them in Acadicus, which I really like, and lots of ways for faculty to be totally creative.
The advantage of this over than just looking in a textbook where you could do this is that they can go right up and see exactly in 3 dimensions where everything's attaching. And that's the beauty of this. The problem with plastic models that we have is that all the muscles are attached to them. You can't use them so with the way this is set up, you can look at each individual muscle or a group, whatever muscles you want to turn it on or off. And then that way you can really see the depth. That's what's amazing about it. So you could, like, again, where you can, with your position, be able to see superficial, closer muscles, deeper muscles, you know,
Yeah.
based on that as well, which is just so cool.
This is awesome.
It's amazing, isn't it?
This is awesome. Hold it.
So that would be, I mean, there you go. You could have a lecture on the bones of the wrist,
Yeah.
like sitting underneath the wrist. I mean,
We're all sitting under the wrist as a
how
bunch of,
cool is that, you know?
And so we asked them, you know, what would you like to see happen in virtual reality that you're not already able to do in traditional simulation? So the message from industry came across loud and clear, to focus on communication skills, especially when dealing with agitated patients or family members, because that's something that students don't typically get the chance to experience during their clinical experience in school. Simulation is a nice bridge, you know, for students as they learn these things in skills and in classrooms before they actually get out in practice. Or
But,
if you wanted to show students, you know, how they're transitioning. So maybe he's in long-term care, but he's getting worse.
Yeah.
So now we call and he's admitted
Yeah.
to the hospital. So now we load the
Yeah.
hospital room scene, and now he's getting worse because his blood pressure is outrageous. So, you know, we'll go to an ICU type environment. So it's easy to show those transitions to students that way too.
And then you'd want to walk through, how are you going to address this baby's airway to help them to breathe better? How do you troubleshoot that? Do you do the steps that we are hoping you're going to do? And if not, let's talk about that. We can learn from that. And then we can, as the instructor, I can modify things to try and challenge the learner if I need to, or guide them. Yeah, I think, you know, one advantage of a virtual environment could be just to orientate someone to what things are going to look like. You know, in medicine, so many times in my career, you just get thrown in this new environment that you're clueless to, and it's like you're just supposed to figure it out. And that can be, we do it, but it's not a pleasant feeling. I think it also, we could make things much more user friendly for anyone kind of in a new environment, and probably make things safer and a better experience if we were to potentially let them virtually step into it, walk them through it, like some of the equipment, some of the things, if you're doing surgery, whatever that might be, where, and that the beauty of that is you could do it kind of anytime and anywhere.
Having, like that faculty champion is key, absolutely key.
In the real world, when we're in clinical with our students, we don't wait to get a score from somebody else. We're evaluating them while they're doing their clinical. We're watching what they can do. We're sitting down with them and talking. And this is the space that brings that all together. And that's why I'm so excited about Acadicus.
Why don't we pause there and we'll do a debrief at this point. As the code leader, why don't you give me a summary of what this patient had and what you were kind of presented with?
Because this is virtual reality, and that's what it is to always look in the scenario. This looks fantastic to me. It looks so clear and so real and very immersive.
I mean, you could imagine if you had a really good actor, the person could be stressed out or however they may be. Maybe they don't even speak English. So all these challenges you could have with like different scenarios that are very real, but that you want to go well. So have them go well in virtual reality so that when it is real, you have a good conversation, a delicate, important conversation.
Whenever you run a code, I want you to remember, as the code leader, always try to give what is called a situational awareness. Look at with the patient, look at your monitor.
We are trying to get students to be more aware of the environment, more aware of this person's story and who they are, because we all know when you're trying to communicate therapeutically, the more you know about the patient, you can help redirect some of that agitation. Sometimes if you bring up things from their past that they enjoyed.
Bringing those patients to life is what's so important. You can actually embody the patient. So you can go in ghost mode. Your students don't even know you're there with the patient, and you could become the patient. You can also change the monitors so that you can make the patient deteriorate, or you can make them get better based on the actions of the students. That to me is critical. And
the moment in the ICU, you have loads of resources, but until you say something, people might not be able to react appropriately.
I want those students to get a VR headset and get a laptop that can drive a high fidelity simulation like Acadicus on day one.
What was your strategy getting started with all of this?
Well, I guess I would say we didn't have a strategy.
There's some fear coming into this, like, oh, I'm gonna have to change everything that I do. No, you don't have to change everything you do. How could I do this within a virtual reality environment? And the chances are you probably can. I'm in Florida, you're in Montreal, John's back in Wisconsin, but we're all still here together.
And maybe one of them is on the West Coast at Stanford Medical School, and maybe one's on the East Coast in Boston, and maybe one's in Texas at Baylor. But all those folks could be in Acadicus, in a mock code together, bringing their own learning from whatever coast they're on, their medical school background, and they can all work together, communicate as if they're in the same room in real time. They can see each other's avatar, they can hear each other, and they can watch each other execute the steps and coordinate that. And there's not enough that can be said about practicing that teamwork.
this space is, to me, it's a space where it's bringing everybody together.
So much of what VR could do would be to touch on conversations or more dialogue within medicine. How do you counsel someone, or how do you counsel a grieving parent whose child's dying? How do you do a prenatal consult for a family who just found out their baby has a heart defect that's going to require multiple surgeries? Here, go have this difficult conversation with his family because you watched me do it once. And there's so much nuance and detail around that, and so much complexity, that I think virtually you can practice in that environment without the risk of actually harming a human being, like with a procedure or with a conversation that went really bad, that you would say, whoa, like, let's coach you through that. Let's do that differently. And like when you talked about having an actor on the other end in a virtual environment, maybe that's an actor who's had real life experience with something that could say, hey, I did lose a child. And let me give you some advice on this, and then help the learner so that in real life, when they actually have to do it, they're more comfortable and it goes better. This is just one piece of a story, right? So if you had a family who came in for prenatal counseling and you talk to them then, and then maybe you go do your pre-delivery consult, and then you have this scenario, and then you have the discussions afterwards, and then you have them go up to the NICU, and then you have tough discussions up there, or you have to, so this is, and then what about when they're discharged home, like, and they have follow-up. So you could imagine, like, with medicine, if you kind of pop in at any time, there's all these opportunities to say, well, what would the learning experience be right now? And I think this is also a really great way to think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and some of the the biases and the problems we have within medicine. Why not address that in virtual world and help people get educated and trained and aware, so that we do better in the real world? And so I think these are environments that are safer, where if you have the right actors who could say, like, okay, I come from a different background and I've had these life experiences and I don't trust the hospital, and I'm going to play my role. And then, we'd have a scenario, and then how do we conduct ourselves in those environments, and what kind of opportunities are there for learning? And I think that's where virtual reality right now could be a really powerful tool to practice some of this stuff that is really important and absolutely affects a person's experience in the hospital.
So if you had 5 students and you wanted to do one-on-one showing them a process, you could have all 5 students in with the 5 situations, and they could play the video, and they could follow you as the instructor through the process, and you could be in live watching them perform. And if they have questions, you're there to answer them. So the pre-briefing is also important, and that can be done with the 3D recording. It's just the system just allows you so much, because you can do that one-to-many, one-to-one, because you have that potential to do the holocrons and the 3D recordings. For debriefing, you really want the students to reflect on what they've done and to think about that whole experience while you help them connect the dots, because you want them to understand, what they should have done, or what could have been done, or why that educational episode was so important. You really want to connect those dots.
Our minds are designed to want to be in places and to be able and to remember places and what happens in those places.
So research has shown that immersion, as most of you probably heard, right, creates the same kind of activity in the brain as when you're truly experiencing reality. And because of that, there's long-term retention of the material.
So when I became more aware of VR and what its capabilities were, I thought it was a unique approach, a contemporary approach that could maybe bridge a gap that would allow for improved learning and really like memorable learning. So the immersiveness of it, I think, how do you lock in that into memory? And I figured these experiences might do that. Their brain thinks it's real. It's kind of like if you've done VR, sometimes and you're afraid of heights or something, some of the scenarios you'll be in where you're up on a building or a mountain, you literally are like trying to grab for the wall because you think you're going to fall. And so your mind has been, I guess, tricked or convinced. And so that's important in order to kind of, I think, that memory piece I was talking about, I feel like that allows for better learning, and then it doesn't feel as artificial. The reality is with intubation, you need to do about 80 to 100 of them before you get good, before you master it. And I kind of look at it like, if I'm learning how to play the piano and I'm a new learner and there's an expert who's teaching me and I watch them do Mozart's Concerto number 27, and then I'm supposed to play it in front of an audience and then teach someone, it's like, well, that would be ridiculous. I wouldn't be able to do it. I'd make mistakes. But in medicine, we kind of do that.
If anyone has ever spent, the evening or a day in a hospital by a loved one's bedside, you see gaps and you see safety concerns. And that's what's created for me that passion. We can make this even better. The care that we provide to patients, making them feel heard and their family members understand what's going on. So we divided our virtual simulation into 3 different levels or 3 different possibilities. So one is the truly immersive VR, like John was talking earlier today, where the student has the headset on, they're in the environment, they're totally immersed. Like I like to give the story, like we have to be careful what kind of furniture we put in these virtual environments, because it becomes so real after a few minutes that people, you know, might want to lean on the bed or lean right on the table, and it's not there, but they feel like it's there. And
The setting would be the baby was already born and on the table. You come in and you're going to hear the baby grunting or having difficulty with breathing. So as a learner, you need to recognize, oh, this baby's in some distress.
I think getting your leadership on board is key, number one.
And I took the headset off and I was like, okay, I'll take it right now.
As the digital technology offers more fidelity and it becomes easier to use, it's going to be leveraged more and more often, right? So instead of having to go into the simulation lab, any student can log on anytime, anywhere. At some point, learners are going to have expectations, and if we don't meet them, they're just going to go find programs and learning opportunities that meet their expectations.
There's a lot of opportunity here, and I do feel like this is one of the new frontiers of medical training and education, and will continue to grow. So it's cool to be a part of it.
I'm just so excited to be working with you, and I'm so thankful you're a partner of ours. So
The more people see how cool this is and how realistic it is, I think more people